Good afternoon. More than 30 years ago, the Project on History of Black Writing began its investment in preserving and recovering literature by writers of African descent. Today, we remain committed to creating critical spaces for teaching, learning, researching, and presenting Black literature both in the U.S. and globally. We are therefore very pleased to present the 7th webinar of Black Poetry After the Black Arts Movement, a summer institute funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities. Our special guest today is the poet Sonia Sanchez, one of the founding poets of the Black Arts Movement and one of the most inspiring, challenging, nurturing, and game-changing writers of our age. I am Evie Shockley, Associate Professor of English at Rutgers University, New Brunswick. Before we get started, a quick logistical note. We would like to invite you to interact with our guests today via the chat tool that you will find in the menu at the upper part of your webinar window. We hope that you will use it to provide feedback for the poet as a place for virtual applause and encouragement. You might start by using the chat window to provide a special virtual welcome to our guest today, the poet Sonia Sanchez. So it's Sonia Sanchez, poet, playwright, activist, mother, professor, is an internationally known figure and one of the most important writers of our times. I don't make this claim lightly. There are many ways to measure importance, and Professor Sanchez exceeds the mark in all of them. If we think of productivity and longevity, we note that she is the author of over 16 books of poetry, plays, and prose, beginning with Homecoming, published with Dudley Randall's Broadside Press in 1969, and most recently including Morning Haiku, published by Beacon Press in 2010. Shake Loose My Skin, published in 1999, offers a rich sampling of the first 30 years of her work as a poet, and her plays are collected in the 2010 volume I'm Black When I'm Singing, I'm Blue When I Ain't, and Other Plays, edited by Jacqueline Wood. Her editorial work includes the 2014 publication of SOS, Calling All Black People, a Black Arts Movement Reader, which she co-edited with Professors John Bracey and Jim Smethurst. If we think of importance in terms of recognition from the literary establishment, which we do and we don't, we note that Professor Sanchez has received a host of honors, including the National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, the 1984 Lucretia Mott Award, a Pew Fellowship in the Arts for 1992-93, the Langston Hughes Poetry Award in '99, Poetry Society of America's 2001 Robert Frost Medal, and the 2009 Robert Creeley Award, among many others. Her collection, Homegirls and Hand Grenades, won the 1985 American Book Award. She is currently a scholar in residence at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, an institutional treasure of and for Black writing, and a place of great significance for Professor Sanchez herself, where we are privileged to be holding today's conversation. If we look at her importance in terms of political impact, we might point to some of her path-breaking moves. Professor Sanchez was, I believe, the first academic to teach a course in Black Studies in support of the 1960 student movement at San Francisco State University. Likewise, she was one of the first Black writers who was neither a member of the LGBTQ community nor HIV positive herself to write a book concerning the impact of HIV/AIDS on Black people. Her commitment to women's liberation, peace, and racial justice takes many forms, including her service as a sponsor of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, a board member of Madre, and as a member of the Granny Peace Brigade. She has been recognized with the 1989 Peace and Freedom Award from the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and as a Ford Freedom Scholar by the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. If we think about her influence, the vertical and horizontal reach of her work, it's hard to know where to begin and impossible to know where to end. Professor Sanchez has lectured at over 500 universities and colleges in the United States and has traveled extensively reading her poetry in Africa, Cuba, England, the Caribbean, Australia, Europe, Nicaragua, the People's Republic of China, and Canada. She was Temple University's first presidential fellow and also held the Laura Carnell Chair in English there. Her students are legion, and the students of her work are even more numerous. She's one of the few Black writers to have had an academic journal dedicated to her work, as well as the work of the Black arts movement generally, BEMA, the Sonia Sanchez Literary Review. Her respect and renown are renewed with each generation, notably including the hip hop generation. We have two examples of her legacy, at least from within this webinar series alone, as she was cited by both Jessica Care Moore and Sharon Strange, and I believe some of the other presenters as well, as a mentor, a model, and a crucial supporter of their work. If we think about courage, wisdom, generosity, humility, ferocity, persistence, beauty, and intelligence, we think about Sonia Sanchez. If we think about critical social analysis, immersion in Black history, provocative, innovative art, and the love of what is human in all of us, we think of Sonia Sanchez. Professor Sanchez has said that she writes to, quote, help bring forth the truth about the world, to tell the truth about the Black condition as I see it, and therefore to offer a Black woman's view of the world. She goes on, I cannot tell the truth about anything unless I confess to being a student, growing and learning something new every day. In that spirit of growth and truth, and with great admiration and love, I am delighted to welcome Professor Sonia Sanchez. Greetings, Sister Sonia.
Greetings to you, my dear sister. So good seeing you.
So good to have you here. I would love it if you could begin our hour with a reading of your work.
Okay. One of the things I was going to read, and you'll probably have to keep the time, okay, was Does Your House Have Lions? But I'd like to begin simply by telling a story about that. My dad was ill, and I said to him when I would go up weekends, I'm writing a book about your son, my brother, Wilson. And my father was stretched out on the couch, and he leaned up and said, well, you can't write about him unless you write about me. And he said, and I hope you get me right this time. And I went, whoa, okay, Dad, I hear you. And what he was saying simply is that the early poems I'd written to my father talked always about what a ladies' man he was, you know, how many women he had, and what that really meant to me on many levels. So I like to begin with a poem for my father that I wrote in the 1960s. How sad it must be to love so many women, to need so many Black perfumed bodies weeping underneath you. When I remember all those nights, I filled my mind with long wars between short-sighted Trojans and Greeks, while you slapped some wide hips about in your private dungeon. When I remember your deformity, I want to do something about your makeshift manhood, I guess. That is why on meeting your sixth wife, I crossed myself with her confessionals. That's a hard poem. So the great thing is that I asked my dad that day, what did he mean? And he said simply that the problem is that I didn't realize that the only woman he ever loved was my mother. And when she died, all the other women were accoutrements. So I began to question him that day in no uncertain terms. So I'll begin to read Does Your House Have Lions? And this is a poem that has been staged as dramatic work. People have performed it as a senior thesis in a place called Philadelphia. And they had for 3 people as my brother, an African-American, a Latino brother, and a white brother. So it's really, really very, interesting and fascinating. So anyway, the poem is in rhyme royal, and I will begin. Rhyme royal, for those of you who write poetry, the rhyme scheme is ABABBCC. This is the sister's voice. This was a migration unlike the 1900s of Black men and women coming north for jobs, freedom, life. This was a migration to begin, to bend a father's heart again, to birth seduction from the past, to repay desertion at last. Imagine him short and black, thin mustache draping thin lips. Imagine him country and exact, thin body, underfed hips, watching at this corral of battleships and bastards, watching for forget and remember, dancing his pirouette. And he came, my brother, at 17, recruited by birthright and smell, grabbing the city by the root with clean metallic teeth, commandant and infidel, pirate and his family in their cell, and we waited for the anger to retreat, and we watched him embrace the city and the street. First, he auctioned off his legs, eyes, heart, in rooms of specific pain. He specialized in generalized, learned New Yorkese and all profane, enslaved his body to cocaine, denied his father's signature, damned his sister's overture, and a new geography greeted him, the Atlantic, drifted from offshore to lick his wounds, to give him slim transfusion as he turned, changed, wore a new waistcoat of solicitor, antidote to his southern skin, ammunition for a young paladin, and the bars, the glitter, the light, discharging pain from his bygone anguish of young black boys scared of the night. Sequestered on this new bank, he surveyed the fish, sweet cargoes, crowded with scales, feverish with quick sails, full sails of flesh, searing the coastline of his acquiesce, and the days rummaging his eyes, and the nights flickering through a slit of narrow bars, hips, thighs, and his thoughts labeling him misfit as he prowled, pranced in the starlit city, coloring his days and nights with gluttony and praise and unreconciled rights. That's my brother coming north, not to praise his family, not to be in concert with his family, not to say, hi, Dad, it's so good seeing you after all these years, but to damn his family. And he will proceed to do much damage, my brother, with his family, because he was very angry, because his whole point, as far as he was concerned, was that he had come north in order to damn this northern family. So that was the part about my brother. And the other part is my father's voice. The book is divided into 4 sections. The first section is the sister's voice. The second is the brother's voice. The third is the father's voice. And the fourth section is family and ancestors, which ends the book. But my father then, after I told him that I was indeed doing this, he began to talk about my mother, and he had never done that. He began to talk about his son's mother. He had never done that before. And as a consequence, I was able to, in quotes, take notes, sit up and listen, and began to understand those things that had never been told to me. And this is the father's voice. The day he traveled to my daughter's house, it was June. He cursed me with his morning nod of anger as he filtered his callous walk, skip hop, feet slipshod from 125th Street bars, face curled with odd reflections. The skin of a father is accented in the sentence of the unaccented. And then my father talks about himself. I was a Southern Negro man playing music, married to a high yellow woman who loved my unhurt face, who slept with me in Nordic beauty. I, prisoner since my birth to fear, I unfashioned, buried in an open grave of mornings unclapped with constant sight of masters fattened, decked with my diminished light. And then he talks about my mother, his first wife. This first wife of mine died in childbirth. This face of complex lace exiled her breath into another design, and I died, became wanderlust, demanded recompense from friends for my heartbreak, cursed the land for this new heartache, put her away with a youthful pause, never called her name again, wrapped my heart in gauze. And then I talk about him becoming the Romeo that I knew, became Romeo bound, applauded women as I squeezed their syrup, drank their stencil face, danced between their legs, placed my swollen shank to the world, became man distilled, early 20th century black man fossil, fulfilled by women things for closing on my life. Mother, where do I go before I arrive? And then he talks about my brother's mother. She wasn't as beautiful as my first wife, this ruby-colored girl, insinuating her limb against my thigh, positioning her wild life, her non-virginal smell as virginal. Her climb towards me with slow walking heels made me limp, made me stumble, made my legs squint until I stopped, stepped inside her footprint. And then he asked forgiveness. I did not want to leave you, son. This flame, this pecan-colored festival requested me, not my child, your sister. Your mother could not frame herself as her mother, and I, absentee father, and I, nightclub owner, carefree, did not heed her blood, did not see my girl's eyes, shade buckled down with southern thighs. Now, my 78 years urge me on your land. Now my predator legs pray broadcast no new nightmares, no longer Birdman of Cornerstone comes. I come to collapse the past while bonfires burn up your orphan's mass. I sing a dirge of lost black southern manhood. This Harlem man begging pardon, secreting old. How many minutes have we gone?
About 5 minutes.
5 minutes. And that's my father, who begins to tell me what happened. And as a consequence, then my brother will come down in the fourth section. I talk about my brother coming down to my house. Actually, in the same, my father, I give my father the peculiar role of talking about his son, and he did not even know that what happened, what transpired, but he said simply that I was told, I don't remember who, I think I was told he entered his sister's house. And he becomes the person chronicling something that he wasn't even there. And it was a chance that I took, but I wanted my father to continue this dialogue here. So I gave him all the information that my brother came, and he came cursing him again. And I finally turned to my brother and said, you're 30 years of age. When you were 17, I said, okay. When it was 18, I said, yeah. When you were 20, I said, you can continue to curse, but you're 30 now, stop it. All we know about our parents is that they do the best that they can do, period. That's all. And he continued to curse, and I would then shake him and slap him, and we would fall on the floor, and I would begin to tell him about his mother. So then my brother will leave my house that Sunday, and I'll end with the brother's voice and the father's voice, 2 stanzas. My brother will leave and go to his father's house in New York and ask forgiveness, brother's voice. There is nothing I do not comprehend. I have become a collector of shouts. Hold my ears, Father. I have come to mend our hearts, raise a glass, celebrate, root out lyrical slaughters, become your only son devout. I have become a lover of sweet water. I worship stone. I will not betray you, Father. And the Father's voice, steady your hand, O man. Do not trouble yourself with language. Stalk his wound. He is listening to your corpuscles, cradle the clap and thunder of a new sound. He has called your name, and old teeth are found. Can you hold me, son, as I rise from this whimper? Can you hear me, son, as I cross over this river? And it is, my father would call me that night and says, oh, Sonia, Wilson came to the house, and he's, we hugged, and he's forgiven me, I've forgiven him. He said, oh, it's so good having a son. It's so good having my son back. I said, yeah, Dad, it must be really great having a son. He said, oh, no, you don't understand. This is about 12 o'clock at night. It's so good having a son. I said, I can imagine, Dad, it is good having a son. And that's the last thing he said to me that night. And I got off the phone thinking, he's never said it's so good, Gran, having a daughter. But I was so glad that I was part of that reconciliation of father and son, because it meant then that we were all reconciled together as a family.
That is such an amazing poem, and one of the things that we might think about is the difficulty of writing something that is so hard, so difficult for your family, and also a poem that touches on such a difficult subject culturally, a subject that moves into areas of social taboo. Could you talk a little bit more about what work you wanted Does Your House Have Lions to do?
Right. Well, my first move with this book was simply is that when I saw the reconciliation, I thought it was important to do that for many people. I have had students who've come into my office and said, I have not been in contact with my father or my mother for 12 years. And I was asked why. When I asked all my students to do a short biographical statement, more and more, there were the statements about I'm not in contact with my father or my mother, you know, and I would write in red because you don't grade a biographical statement. Why not? Right. And they would come into my office, you know, say, well, you don't understand, Professor Sanchez, you don't understand just how hard it is and what this person did to me. I said, my dear sister or my dear brother, whatever happened to you happened to all of us. Can you really think that, that this only happens to you? I said, who do you think you are that you're that sacred, that you're that special? What happened, everything that's happened to you has happened to all of us. And they kind of sit back and look at you. And I said, so look, but what we do have to do, and what I always say to you, you got to forgive them. Your life will not be what it should be until you forgive. And once you forgive them, then you can move on. And then you're less prone to make the mistakes with your children also when you have them.
That is so true. And your work bears this this message of forgiveness sort of over the course of your oeuvre. Maybe after a certain point in the early part of your work.
Oh no! Look, when we did the big anthology, SOS, calling all Black people, everyone, the discussion among us is that many of the younger poets would not want some of the real curses, whatever. They wanted to show the poems that, whatever. Yeah. And so I said, well, look, I'm 80. Right, at the time I was 79. I said, look, I'm old enough for people to hear the motherfuckers, you know what I mean? So, but people needed to know, and younger people need to know that we did call people names, and we didn't call them names because we didn't know how to write. I said, someplace said, well, it's evident that you curse a lot. I said, go back and tell me how many times I cursed, because I didn't curse a lot. In my book of poetry, I can tell you the times that I curse. I know the times I curse. I said, but the point is that, well, probably because you were young and you hadn't learned the form. I said, look, when I started to write, I studied with one of the greatest poets on this earth, Louise Bogan. Mm-hmm. And I absorbed everything that she said and read everything that she suggested that we read. And one of the things that we did, and that I did simply at some point, is that I knew how to write what we call standard poetry, mm-hmm. right? My first poems were standard poems. There was not anything in it that said I was Black, brown, yellow, whatever, etc. I said, but what happened to us is Coltrane. What happened to us is Coltrane and the jazz, that came on, and Malcolm. And they could not, Coltrane, when he went, I sat there, and I'm not a revisionist. The first time he did that, we were in a nightclub, and we all got nervous. Someone said, what is he doing? What is he doing? What is he doing? What is he doing? I don't know what he's doing. But I came to hear dun 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 dun, and he's not doing. He's going, what is this? We didn't stay for the second set. We always stayed for the second set anytime we're in a jazz joint. Listen to the great jazz people. But I was at home in my apartment, this little. With my faux leather chairs and this little black and white table, the same table I was sitting at when I heard Malcolm had been assassinated. Mm. And this guy said, I will now play you the different versions of Coltrane. And he started out with my favorite thing, dun 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 dun. Then he got to the last thing that we had heard in the club, and I understood it. because it was 3 o'clock in the morning. I was writing, I was connected to the universe. And I said, he said, fuck you. He couldn't say it out loud on the stage. They were musicians, they would lie, whatever. But at that time, everybody had learned that America was fucking us all, screwing us all, whatever. And most people were not saying anything about it. I was in the Black arts. I was in I was one of the original people helping to form the Black Studies. I organized the first course on the Black woman. So all of those things were happening to me at some particular point, and I realized that those musicians, all those musicians, who took Arabic names, they took names from the Middle East, right? Who began to play music that simulated, an Eastern feel, but also music that went out of the Western construct, someplace else. And you had to, we decided that we were going to identify it. So that's what we did. So I said, don't come to me with stupid questions, okay? I've taught 40 years, and I'm usually very friendly. I said, but you're not a kid, and you should study us as other people study us. And you had to say in that music, when you did the musical pieces, that that's what was happening, period. And you put it down, and it might not have been as poetic as some of your other poems, but it was on target. But that music was hard music. That thing hit you in one ear and came out the other ear, and you were drunk. You were literally drunk with it, and it pounding it. I would walk down the street humming it, and if everyone's looking at me, I'd be on the subway going, and people get up and move. Say, what is wrong with this woman?
Well, it was the music for the times. Your poetry was the poetry for the times.
Exactly.
There are things that make a lot of us see those times returning in certain ways,
yes,
right?
They are.
I want to ask you one of the questions that was sent in advance of the webinar, coming from SUNY Potsdam. Professor James Donahue has written, more than a few of my students in creative writing are interested in poetry as a means to social justice, but they're terrified about speaking out for fear of punishment from the schools, from their families, the community. They feel powerless, and especially trapped by fear of the sort of economic situation, debt and loan debt and so forth. What advice would you give to students who want to write to these times?
Right. Well, that's the simplest one, is that get a pseudonym. And no one will know who you are. The other thing is that, my dear sisters and brothers, I'm talking to you now, that, one of the things that we had is that we had a man who came and spoke to us all. His name was Malcolm, and he erased the fear that we all had. We were all in academia. We were all in schools, right? What you are fearing at this point it happens to be things that they're laying on you, saying, if you do this, this will happen to you. Parents told, my father said to me, don't you go to San Francisco, and what are you going to start? Black Studies. Black Studies, my God, Sonia, you need not to go to California, San Francisco. And, and he was saying anything that had the name Black attached to it was doomed to failure, was going to cause problems. And believe me, it will cause problems. But are you telling me, my young brothers and my young sisters, that you're lesser than I? I'm 81 years of age. How can you at your young age be lesser than I? How can you, at some point, when I went in to teach, I went in with a natural, and I said, yeah, I got a natural, don't collapse. Or I would wrap my head in a gele, and I'd go into the English department meetings with a gele on my head, and they would just look at me. But then I get on an airplane, and the flight attendants, at that time they were called stewardesses, who loved to dress. They would come and track me down and said, how did you do that? I want to wear that. That is beautiful. And so at some point, what we were saying out loud to the country for the first time is that people imitated us. We who have been imitators of everybody else out there now had people coming to us, imitating us. We who wrote the poetry that we wrote, everybody else started imitating us. The world. I went to France, I went to Paris, I went to London, I went to the Caribbean. What kind of poetry were they writing? They were writing the poetry we were writing at this particular point. And I'm not saying you didn't write soft love poems. I wrote soft love poems, whatever, because that is radical, that is progressive. But at the same time, that music, because as we say in our introduction, that the two people who set the tone for the Black arts happen to have been Coltrane and Malcolm. Mm-hmm. The irony of all this is that they're dead, when the whole thing comes together. And then what do? Do you stop and say, well, they were the ones taking all the flack? And they were. Mm-hmm. Right. Now, you can't take the flack anymore. So I stood up on stages and took the flack. And I took many a flack. And you're right. I went from university to university. My father used to say, you're not going to get tenure if you keep talking up. I said, I can't teach any other way unless I tell the truth. And I turned to my father and said, you mean you don't want me to tell the truth about this country? And he backed down at some point. Yeah. And it's the only thing that will save your lives, my dear sisters and brothers, to tell the truth, whatever. Because there are other people out there, black, white, green, purple, blue, brown, who are also telling the truth. And so all you have to do is find that other group that you can fit into, and you can still remain truth sayers on this earth.
And do it in collectivity.
In collectivity, that's right.
Beautiful. Part of what you were saying reminds me of something that we talked about earlier last week, about the difference, the transformation in some of the elders. Mm-hmm. To in terms of their reception of your work from when they were first hit with it, didn't understand it in the same way you didn't understand Coltrane when he went to free jazz or whatever. That's right. But who later came back and took a different look at your work. Would you share the story that you told me about Professor Davis at Howard?
I love Professor Ossipee Davis, and some of you younger people, scholars, should read him and read some of his scholarship. Mm-hmm. A poet by the name of Larry Neal was teaching at a college in Hartford, Connecticut, and he set up a panel. On one side of the room was Dr. Arthur P. Davis, Sterling Brown, and the other brother who did Cavalcade. I can't think of his name. I always blank on his name. That big book, right? Yeah. And then on the other side was Larry Neal, Barack, and myself, And my plane had been late. So all of a sudden I come into this hall and these students are in an uproar, whatever. And I remember walking down the aisles, getting on the stage. I hugged Larry and Barack. And then I went over and I hugged Arthur P. Davis, Sterling Brown, and whoever the other person was, the other man, the other editor. And it was a setup because the students wanted to see us slapping each other and debating each other. And I didn't do it. And Dr. Davis said to me many years later, you came over and you greeted us and you hugged us. And I said, well, I just wanted you to know that I had read you, and I wasn't offended because you had said that we were, we were haters, because he said to me, and Sterling Brown said the same thing. The problem with you young poets, when you came out socking and hitting everybody, is that we had already our niche in academia and in the world of poetry, and all of a sudden you were coming with some stuff that you were upsetting us and the establishment and the country. And so therefore it was very hard to say, let me embrace you, because it was very difficult. And so, and as Brother Sterling said, you scared us half to death. Right. And I guess we did scare people half to death. But the great thing about what I call a great scholar, and for all you young scholars out there, is that it is always good to say when you made a mistake. Absolutely. That's, to me, that is a true scholar. And I had come down to Howard University to do a reading for students. It's a packed audience there, Crampton Hall. Yeah. I saw Dr. Davis sitting down front. So, I'm behind the podium, and I, did this talk, and then I ended up with some poems. And then the students got up and they stamped their feet and whatever. And then they sat down. we were getting ready for a Q&A, and Dr. Davis stayed on his feet, and he says, I am Dr. Arthur P. Davis. I taught at Howard University for 40 years. And some years ago, I wrote an essay about these young people in the Black arts movement, and he says, I want you to know that I was wrong in what I said. Well, I came right off the stage, walked right down in front and hugged him and kissed him, and we just held each, and the students just went, wow, well, what was that? That was showing students at some point, that there really should be no division between us at all. That if you understand what times you come, out of, then you have to understand that we could not write necessarily the way that they wrote, but we do. I mean, we had the skills, Baraka certainly was one of the greatest poets this country has ever produced, whatever. So we had the skills, we knew how to do it, but also we knew also at some point we had to throw some politics in there, because at some point we were trying to organize people in this country. And so one of the myths was that only Black folks came to our readings, but that's not true. No. I mean, no. Half my audience was white students that many I had taught also were Latino students, were Asian students, because they had the same ideas that we were talking about, talking to them. And so that was, that was a mighty thing. And many other people along the way, a great poet, Gwendolyn Brooks, always supported us. And the thing about Gwendolyn Brooks, Sister Gwen, is that she said, I want to write like you'll write, because I see you get to people. I see people respond to you, and so she supported us. So that's why I support younger writers. That's why I will stop and send a check or send a note or send a gift and say, how are you? Can I help you? Do you need help? What's going on? Because that's what Sister Gwen did, She was, and so we learn from the elders who've gone before. So when we become an elder, we do that same thing. But fear, you should just write for all the students. Put fear, write it on some paper, right? Then fold it up to the smallest thing that you can fold up to. Then start tearing it, okay? Just tear it into pieces. And then put fire to it. And then take it outside and spread it to the winds, okay? Whatever. That's where fear belongs, not in your guts, not in your throat, not in your eyes, not in your hands, not in your feet. Because, we're not saying, in this day, feet get stepping,
Oh, these are words to live by, I have to say. I mean, you touched on another question that I wanted to ask you, and I'll sort of put it in two parts. Could you say more about the role that you've taken in terms of mentoring the generations after you? And beyond that, where do you see the legacy of the Black arts movement when you look around today?
Well, I know I was doing a reading once at Columbia University. And at the end of the reading, professor stood up and said, oh, Professor Sanchez, it's so good to come and hear you read, because I especially always love your lyrical pieces, right? And he said, I'm going to accept your hard-hitting political pieces because they're well-written. I mean, it's interesting. He said, but I am so tired of this rap stuff, whatever, And so it's good to come really hear a poet. And, some people clapped and some of the younger people did not clap, right? And I said, my dear brother, I don't offend people at all. I mean, that's, but I just do want to say to you that there are many of the young rappers who are poets. They're true poets. And I say, and I always defend them and support them, especially in all the good that they do. Now, if they are constantly calling a sister a bitch and a hoe, I mean, I've been to many of these events where they do their poetry and they do their rapping. And if someone's on stage say that, I go, boo! And the first time they had that big program was at, for all the rappers, was at Radio City Music Hall here in New York City. And I know Sister Brenda and I, Brother Talib's mother, and I stood up the whole time, listening to it, right? And one of the young brothers came out and I booed. And some people behind me, some sisters said, "Why is she booing? Why do you boo?" I said, "Are you a hoe?"
Right.
And they went, whatever. So that's why I booed. You should have booed too, right? Anytime someone calls you a hoe, I say you need to say one or two things. Your mama,
Right.
whatever,
Right.
or boo. But they had a backstage party that Brenda and I were invited to, and the brother Dave Chappelle was standing on the steps, and he said, "Professor Sanchez, how you doing, Sister Sonia?" He said, "That was you, huh?" And I said, "Right, I will boo you, if you disrespect women." I said, "We have gone a long ways in this country to deny what the things that they say about Black women." I said, "So I will say it out loud under my breath, between my teeth, whatever. But if you are able to say it out loud, I will reply. I will respond." So yeah, my dear sister. That's important. What was the other part of the question?
Thinking about rap as one of the sort of parts of the legacy of the Black Arts Movement. And actually, maybe this is a good way to direct or shape this, because we had someone write in and give us the name we were looking for. Saunders Redding was the.
Thank you.
Yeah. Saunders Redding.
Thank you.
And another person has written in asking if you would be willing to talk about Margaret Walker in this tradition. And now that I'm thinking,
who's asking? Is that our dear sister?
It might be Miriam.
Is that Mary Emma?
No, it's Jerry Ward, Professor Ward.
Jerry, I've been trying to contact you for the longest time. You must call me, okay? Right.
But if we think about Walker and Brooks, yourself, and
I love
Jessica
them all.
And Sharon, that tradition. I mean,
it is.
Talk about what it's like to look backwards and forwards from.
I always talk to Sister Margaret and Sister Gwen, because they were so important to me. Sister Margaret and Sister Gwen. And Sterling Brown, and Dudley Randall, and Sister Margaret in DuSable Museum,
Burroughs,
Sister Margaret Burroughs, all of them formed an amazing bunch of people. And so I always included them in everything that I did on purpose. The thing that when I got a little money, when I was teaching at Amherst College, I invited Sister Gwen, and Brother Sterling, and got big bucks for them, and that's what you do. You repay them for all the years that they have loved us and continued to love us and supported us. Sister Gwen would take her money and give us an award, a monetary award, when they had the conferences in Chicago. I do that, because I've learned from people like Sister Gwen. Sister Gwen didn't live in some mansion someplace. I don't live in some mansion someplace. People come to my house and say, "Is this where you live?" And I say, "Yes, this is where I live, in Germantown, on purpose."
Yes.
Because one of the things that you understand at some point is that the writings of Sister Gwen and Sister Margaret for my people, the writings of Brother Sterling, my dear sister, the strong men keep getting stronger. Dudley Randall started Broadside Press publishing us, and we do the first poem on Malcolm in that press for the first time, a whole book on Malcolm. What was important to all of us is that we understood that they were the people who came before us, and we were a continuation of them. And what I want younger people to understand, the ones who say, "I'm not political," and I said, "You are political, but not by not being political." Everything's political. Either you maintain the status quo or you talk about change. Take your pick. But either way, you're political. Okay, you got to understand that. But the point is that, our ancestors, what you learn, weren't scared. We have a history and a history of people who rose up, who said simply, "I will not take this any longer." And so therefore, that's what we did in the poetry in the 60s. We will not have you constantly telling us who we are. Let me tell you who I am. Let me tell you about my grandmother. Let me tell you about this woman, walking the streets of Philadelphia. Let me tell you about in this poem about Sister Gwendolyn Brooks, who she really is, who Sister Margaret Walker really is at this women's conference. Let me tell you what it really means to be a Black woman on this earth, trying to walk upright, and there's always the people saying you ain't nothing at all. So what we did, so I never had acted the fool on a stage, my sister, because I knew that when I got on the stage, they were with me, so I couldn't act a fool, I couldn't do crazy things on stage, at all, because they were there watching me saying, look up, Sonia, we're here looking at you, right? And that's what this is truly all about, the great tradition of Black writing, all the way from Phyllis Wheatley, all the way up to all these younger poets there, writing. They might be doing it differently than we do it, whatever, but I'm not to tell them, Questlove, when I go and listen to them and hear them playing and hear them also going back, looking at some of the other music, and incorporating that into what they do, I say, amen, a woman, a woman, a woman, a woman, amen. I understand truly what this is about. When I listen to Talib, and Talib and the brother who just changed his name, Mos Def, right. These are people that I sought out, and Sister Ursula, and I sought them out saying, come, I have a gig. Baraka and I have a gig, but I'm going to include you too on the gig so you can make some money, so you don't always have to be in Timbuktu someplace playing a gig. And so you can begin to talk about yourselves. What we began to do is that we began to talk about what we were doing. Other people started to say, you were doing this. I said, no, I'm not. So I got on stages, I read, and in conversation, I said, this is what I'm doing. So I taught the students what we were really doing. That was important. So Sister Ursula and Talib got on stage with Barack and myself, but we also showed the students no separation here. We are a continuation of each other. None of this crazy jealousies that people are throwing out at each other. Because we wanted to say simply, hey, there's room for all of us. So when the younger poets come along, I just say, I say, come on, here's a seat for you. Come on, let's hear what you have to say. Come on, go on, read it. I want to hear it. I want to clap. I want to smile. I want to say as a teacher, oh, I'm not too sure about that, but it was cool, whatever. But that's what you do.
That's what you do. Oh my goodness. Listening to you talk and thinking about all the things that you've been saying. We have such an example of the ideas that you were saying in the quote that I began with, about growth over the course of a life, and about openness. I'm thinking about how much your work demonstrates that you can do what you have said it's important for a poet to do, without being limited to any one particular style of poetry. You draw from the things that you learned from Gauguin. You draw from the things that you learned from Coltrane. Both of those help you think about form in your writing. It's it's such a beautiful example. Thinking long view like that actually makes me want to ask you a question about the documentary that just was released. We as an institute got to see, I think, the next to final version just before it was released back in July, and we were very moved by it. Would you share a little bit about what it was like to make the documentary, what you think of it?
I finally have seen you can't watch yourself, because people forget we come out of the civil rights movement, first of all, right? Before we went into the Black arts, Black power, Black studies, okay? And so you never praise yourself. It was never about praising yourself. Whatever. So, I have never watched myself in movies and stuff, I'm serious, when people have something like that, I get up and leave. I'll watch my plays, because that's important for me to see what someone's doing with a play, or I'll watch someone reciting my poetry, but I don't watch me, because it's like, oh God, did I say that? Did I look like that? Did I really have that on? Seriously? But it's like, it's I don't know what it is, but that's the history of that. And so I finally saw it on the third showing. And because one of my twins, I think Marani, said, Mom, you are going to have to answer questions on it. So you got to see it eventually, right? So I slouched down in one of the seats and watched it. And, you know, I was laughing at myself because every time they said they were coming over to record me, to take me, to shoot me, I didn't get dressed up. I mean, I was going around the house and I had on just what I had on. So I regretted that at some point. Like, why didn't you put on something? Why didn't you comb your hair? Why didn't you go get your hair done? You know, whatever. And then I said, because that's not you. Mm-hmm. And also, I wasn't sure whether I was really going to complete this at all. You know, so I was just kind of like feeling my way. So it was like questions like now, and I began to answer questions with them, whatever, etc. And then they kept coming back, or they kept following me when I went to Alabama, when I went other places. They cut a lot, evidently, from that film. I was saying someplace recently, one of the things they cut out, which, you know, I was rushing out to the supermarket. You know, I'm a vegetarian, I'm a macrobiotic, and so I get usually all organic food. So at my store, they had a little organic food, but I was rushing in to get some cleanser and stuff, you know, and some soap and stuff, you know, for the kitchen. And I passed by the meat counter, and you know, I looked at the meat and it was all red. I mean, dyed red dyed meat, you know, because what they do when they want meat to look fresh, they stick it with red dye. And I just stood there. Now, you know, I don't eat meat, right? But I went and got a cart and I put the meat in the cart in a dramatic fashion. People were walking around me as I was doing it, and I was mumbling to myself. Then I went over to the produce, and the veggies and fruit looked as if they had had a nervous breakdown, you know, and they were selling it not for half price or like for whatever. And I took it out and put it out when it pushed the bell. Guy came out and he looked and saw the stuff there. And he said, lady, what are you doing? And I said, where you live? Do you have this kind of stuff at your supermarket? I know you don't. Right. And he looked at me and he said, lady, what are you doing? I'm going to call the police. I said, good, call the police, because this is a criminal act here. In my neighborhood, this is a criminal act, this food that you bring here. And I said, you know, so call him. And he went back in, and I said, but I'm going to come back tomorrow. You better have some better looking fruit and veggies and meat in here, right? Because I eat meat. You know, I got very dramatic, right? Went in, I got my stuff, and I'm looking at my watch, said, oh my God, my grad student is probably going to leave and whatever. And I felt a tap on my back, and I turned around, and there was this sister with 3 children. She said, how do you do that? And you know, I'm in a hurry, I'm late. I'm thinking, if she leaves, you know, I will collapse, right? And I said, I'm sorry, excuse me. She said, how do you do that? And I said, oh. She said that she went over, you know, there in the produce. I said, my dear sister, I've been in a lot of organizations, and you learn how to organize, you learn how to go out and do campaigns against stores or whatever, against buildings that will not in any way rent to, got something on my tongue, rent to Blacks and Puerto Ricans, you know, period. So I've done things like this. She said, because she said, I want my children to do that. And for the young students, if they're listening, that's why you've got to do that, because you want your children to do that. You want the people you teach to do that, because you're in a country and in a world simply that will screw you with food, will kill you with food that is terrible, that is shot full of all kinds of dye, you know, with vegetables that have no kind of vitamin content at all, will put you in buildings, you know, that that are rat infested and not care would price you out of New York City and make you live outside the city, right? And travel in just the way they did in South Africa. That's why you can't be afraid, my dear sisters and brothers. You must write what you know to be the truth. All I ask of my students was not to be mean, but to write it well. That's all Bogan asked us. She asked us to write well. It was in her class that I published my first poem. In her class, because she taught us what I teach my students, how to sit and work out. And you go to the 8th Street bookstore, you find the journals that reflect your kind of writing. And then you choose 10 of them. And you said no more than 3, because she was the poetry editor of the New Yorker. And she said, no, if you don't get me by the 2nd poem, you ain't going to get me by the 4th or 5th. Send 3 poems, right? And the first time I sent my poetry out, by the time I got back home, it was in my mailbox with the editors, right? And then 2 months later, I would then get, before then, from the Paris Review, I got this George Garrett, sent me this long note saying, Sonia, we would have published this poem, but we were beholden to some of the other people that we knew. This is great. Keep sending me your stuff. I still have that letter from George Garrett, right? And then the next 2 weeks, I was published, Wow. And I went and bought wine because I knew that Bogan drank, and paper cups, and donuts, and went in, and I came in and said, I published, right? And everybody, there's 45 people there, 2 women, all white males, 2 women, right? A white woman and myself. Joanne, she became a children's writer, children's book writer. And I went to see Louise Bogan in her office, because she was not a regular professor. She was a poet, who taught a course at NYU. And I asked her, tell me, do I have any talent? Should I keep writing? And she said, oh, Sonia, why do you want to know? I said, because I want to know if I'm wasting my time. And she said, many people have talent, but they don't do anything with it. And she said, but if you're willing to write, and write as I have instructed, then I said, do I have talent? She said, yes, you do, but you got to be willing to write. And that's what I've done. And I always carry her voice in my head. Her and a woman by the name of Kay Boyle, who's a great, great novelist back there with Hemingway, who was my mentor out at a place called San Francisco State, the people who just said simply at some point, you can write, do it. And that's what I've been trying to do, trying to make every place I enter into a holy place that includes my books also.
Oh, thank you so much. Now I want the 2nd documentary, the 3rd documentary, 12 more webinars, more than we have time for right now. Thank you so much for being here and for talking with us.
And thank the audience. Are they still there?
They are still there. I'm going to have some closing remarks, and it includes a thank you to the audience. Absolutely. Please join us for our 8th and final webinar in the series, Nathaniel Mackey, on Wednesday, December the 9th at 1 p.m. Central Time. We'd like to thank today KU's Ermal Garinger Academic Resource Center staff, and also the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, especially Ms. Aisha Diori, for making today's webinar possible. A very special thank you to Sonia Sanchez for being here, and a special thank you also to you all for sharing this exciting event with us. A downloadable podcast from today's webinar will be available on our website soon. In the meantime, don't forget to follow us online on the HBW website, on Twitter, and on our blog about events related to Black writing. See you on Wednesday, December 9th at 1 p.m. Central for our conversation with Nathaniel Mackey. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.